Ever feel like you're just spinning your wheels, you know?
Yeah.
Like you're not making any actual progress on the things you really want to accomplish.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we've all been there, that feeling of wanting to make a big change. But it's just so overwhelming. Where do you even start?
Trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon, right?
Exactly. And that's why today we're going to dig into something that can be a total game changer. It's all about ruthless consistency.
Okay, so not just like regular discipline.
Not just regular discipline.
Yeah.
No, it's like next level dedication to showing up and doing the work day after day.
So almost obsessive then.
You could say that.
Yeah.
It's about consistently putting in the effort, even when it's not glamorous or exciting.
I like that. But I gotta say, the word ruthless, it sounds kind of intense, maybe even a bit negative. I mean,
Mm.
is there a risk of burning out if you're constantly pushing like that?
That's a great question. And that's where things get a little more nuanced. It's not about just mindlessly grinding yourself down. It's about being strategic with your consistency.
Strategic consistency.
Exactly. It's about knowing your limits, building in rest and recovery time, but never losing sight of the long game.
So it's like having the tenacity to keep going,
Yeah.
but also the wisdom to know when you need to take a break.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you need to know when that storm's coming and you need to take shelter for a little bit.
I like that analogy. So it's
Yeah.
like those tiny drops of water consistently wearing away at rock until, bam, you have a Grand Canyon.
Exactly. It's that persistent action over time that leads to those massive results.
Okay, that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
But to build our own Grand Canyon, so to speak,
Mhm.
we have to know what we're aiming for, right?
Yeah.
Like, what exactly are we being ruthlessly consistent with?
Absolutely. You have to define your target. What's the goal you're ruthlessly chipping away at?
So purpose is key, but let's be real for a sec. We've all heard the stories about, Edison and his light bulb, or Mozart spending hours and hours composing. Are those examples really that relevant today?
Okay.
Do they hold up?
I think they do. But we need to go a bit deeper than just the surface level with those stories. Take Edison, for example. Everyone focuses on the thousands of failed attempts. But what most people don't realize is how he structured his experimentation.
So it wasn't just trial and error.
Exactly. Each failure actually informed the next attempt. He was ruthlessly efficient, not just persistent.
So it's not about mindlessly repeating the same action over and over again. It's about consistently refining the process based on the feedback you're getting.
You got it. And then there's Mozart. He wasn't just churning out compositions hoping one would magically become a hit. His early works were actually stepping stones, each one building upon the last, ruthlessly pushing his own musical boundaries.
Okay, I'm starting to see the difference here. But how does this ruthless consistency actually work in our brains? I mean, is it just about willpower, or is there something deeper going on?
Willpower definitely plays a role, but it has its limits. What's really powerful is the whole process of habit formation.
Habit formation.
Yeah, you see, neuroscience shows that when we consistently do something, those actions actually strengthen specific neural pathways in our brains.
It's like carving a groove into your brain, making it easier to do that thing over time.
Exactly. And that's why habits, both good and bad, can be so powerful.
Right, because if we're not careful, we can end up being ruthlessly consistent with bad habits too.
Absolutely. Which is why understanding the psychology behind all of this is so important. We're not robots. We're not just blindly repeating actions. It's about consciously choosing the grooves we want to deepen in our brains.
So a key part of this whole ruthless consistency thing is being ruthlessly selective about what we're being consistent with.
100%. You have to choose your battles wisely.
That makes sense. But is there a downside to this hyper-focus on one specific goal? I mean, don't we risk missing out on other opportunities that might come along?
That's a valid concern. And that's why adaptability is crucial. While your overall goal should remain consistent, the path you take to get there might need to change along the way.
So like those water drops carving out the Grand Canyon, they don't always flow in a straight line, right? They have to adapt to the terrain, but they're still moving towards that ultimate destination.
Perfect analogy. It's about being consistent in your purpose, but flexible in your methods.
Okay, this is already blowing my mind.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into the how-to of all this, let's talk about why this even matters in the first place. Why should someone listening be this invested in being consistent?
Because in a world that's completely obsessed with instant gratification, ruthless consistency is like the unfair advantage.
An unfair advantage.
Exactly. It's the silent force that separates those who just dream about success from those who actually achieve it.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that real lasting success, it doesn't happen overnight. It's built brick by brick, day after day.
Okay, so no magic shortcuts then. But how do we actually cultivate this ruthless consistency? Where do we even begin?
Well, it all starts with brutal honesty.
Yeah.
Really, you have to ask yourself, what's the one area where consistent effort would make the absolute biggest impact? Right now.
Okay. So find the right canyon to carve, so to speak. But the problem is, we often get discouraged before we even see any real progress. How do we push past that initial hump?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And that's where understanding a little bit of behavioral science can be really helpful. You see, our brains, they love rewards.
Dopamine hits.
Exactly. So instead of waiting for some huge payoff way down the line, break your goal down into smaller milestones and celebrate each win along the way.
So it's like giving yourself those little dopamine boosts
Yeah.
to keep that motivation engine running.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes the whole journey a lot more enjoyable.
But I imagine that takes a lot of self-awareness, right? Knowing what kind of reward actually works for you.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the ruthless part comes back in. You have to be ruthless in analyzing your own patterns, what motivates you, what gets you excited. Are you someone who thrives on external validation, or do you need those intrinsic motivators?
Okay, so figure out what makes you tick and then tailor your reward system accordingly.
Exactly, you got it. That's so smart. It's like consistency isn't just about the action itself. It's about being consistent in understanding your own psychology.
Yeah, and that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
But what about when life throws you a curveball? You know, how do you stay consistent when everything around you feels chaotic?
That's a great question. And that's where the difference between ruthless consistency and just plain discipline really becomes clear. Discipline might force you to stick to a rigid plan, even when it's no longer serving you.
So you're saying there's a time to be flexible, to adapt.
Exactly. Think back to our water drop analogy. Sometimes the flow needs to change course because of unexpected obstacles. The key is to keep that overall direction in mind, even if the specific path you're taking needs to be adjusted.
Okay, so be consistent in your commitment to the goal, but adaptable in your approach.
You got it.
But how do you know when to adapt? I mean, isn't there a risk of giving up too easily?
That's where having clear metrics comes in. You need to be tracking your progress, not just in terms of what you're producing, but also in terms of your own well-being. So paying attention to those early warning signs of burnout. Like if you're pushing yourself constantly, but you're feeling more and more drained, that's a sign to maybe ease up a bit.
Exactly. Ruthless consistency isn't about sacrificing your health or your happiness. It's about finding that sustainable rhythm that allows you to progress over the long haul.
Okay, I'm really liking this holistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be honest. Sometimes, even with the best laid plans, we fall off track. What are your go-to strategies for getting back on track when you've slipped up?
Well, first things first, ditch the guilt. It happens to everyone. It's part of the process. What really matters is how quickly you can course correct. Don't dwell on the mistake. Just focus on getting back into that consistent flow.
So it's more about a quick reset than beating yourself up over the slip-up.
Exactly.
But sometimes it feels like those flip-ups can become patterns. How do you break out of a cycle of inconsistency?
That often comes down to identifying your personal triggers. What are the specific situations or emotions that tend to lead you off track? Once you're aware of those patterns, you can start to develop strategies to deal with them.
So it's like being a detective of your own behavior, figuring out those weak spots and then putting safeguards in place.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But sometimes even with all the self-awareness and all the strategies, it's just plain hard to stay motivated.
Yeah.
What do you do when you hit that wall?
Well, one incredibly powerful technique is something called implementation intention.
Implementation intention.
Mm.
Okay, that sounds interesting. What is that?
It's basically creating a pre-commitment to a very specific action. So instead of saying, I'll exercise more, you say, I will go for a run every morning at 7 a.m., rain or shine.
So you remove the decision-making process,
Yeah.
make the action almost automatic.
Exactly. You're basically short-circuiting that inner debate that we all have, which makes it a lot harder to back out when your motivation dips.
I can see how that would be super helpful for building those consistent habits.
It is. And another powerful technique is finding an accountability partner, someone who understands your goals and can provide that external nudge when you need it.
Oh, so like having a support system to help keep you accountable?
Exactly. Someone who celebrates your wins with you and encourages you during those tougher moments.
I love that accountability can make such a huge difference, especially when it comes to maintaining consistency over the long term.
It really can. But even with all these strategies, it's important to remember that ruthless consistency isn't about turning into some kind of productivity machine, you know? It's about making sure your actions line up with your values and ultimately living a more fulfilling life.
That's a really great point. It's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about creating a life where you're consistently showing up as the best version of yourself.
Exactly. And that brings us to a crucial part of ruthless consistency that we haven't really talked about yet. Self-care.
You're right, we haven't touched on that. It's easy to get so caught up in the go, go, go mentality that we forget to take care of ourselves.
Hmm.
But how do you find that balance between relentlessly pursuing your goals and taking the time to rest and recharge?
It's definitely a balancing act. And it goes back to that ruthless self-awareness we were talking about before. You have to consistently check in with yourself. How are you feeling mentally? How's your physical state? Knowing when to push yourself and when to pull back.
So it's almost like you need to build rest into your system, not look at it as being lazy, but as a strategic necessity for keeping that momentum going.
Exactly. Think of it like an athlete training for a marathon. They don't run at full speed every single day. They build in rest days. They vary the intensity. They listen to their bodies. Ruthless consistency isn't about ignoring your limits. It's about respecting them.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
Right.
It's not about pushing yourself to the point of burnout. It's about finding that sustainable rhythm that allows you to keep going day after day, year after year.
Exactly. You're playing the long game, remember? And you can't win a long game if you're running on empty.
So ruthlessly consistent self-care is just as important as ruthlessly consistent action. I love that. But let's be real. There are times when, even with all the best strategies and self-awareness and self-care, we still fall short. We miss deadlines. We break a streak. We make mistakes. How do we handle those inevitable setbacks?
The most important thing is don't beat yourself up. It happens to everyone. It's part of being human. What separates the people who ultimately succeed from those who don't is how they respond to those missteps.
So it's not about avoiding failure. It's about having the resilience to get back up and keep going.
Exactly. See those setbacks as valuable feedback, not as some kind of personal failing. Analyze what happened. Adjust your approach if you need to, and most importantly, don't let it derail your overall commitment to consistency.
It's like that saying, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. It's about that unshakable belief that you can get back on track.
And that belief, that unwavering faith in yourself, that's really the fuel for true ruthless consistency. It's the fire that keeps you going when all the external motivation fades away.
But how do you cultivate that kind of unshakable self-belief? Is it something you're born with, or can it be developed?
It's a bit of both, but like any skill, it can definitely be strengthened with practice. One really powerful technique is to actively look for evidence of your past successes, no matter how small they might seem.
So shift your perspective. Focus on what you have achieved instead of dwelling on what you haven't.
Exactly. It's about intentionally building that mental library of proof points that remind you that you are capable, you are resilient, and you are worthy of achieving your goals.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation, I feel like. We've really peeled back the layers of this whole concept of ruthless consistency. It's so much more than just discipline or willpower. It's about self-awareness and self-belief. It's about adaptability and self-care. And it's about having the resilience to bounce back from setbacks.
And it's about understanding that it's not some quick fix, it's a lifelong journey.
But it's a journey worth taking, for sure. So as we wrap up here, I want to challenge everyone listening to think about that one area of their life where ruthless consistency could have the biggest impact. What's that one canyon you want to carve? What's that one dream you want to turn into reality?
And remember, it's not about making these grand, sweeping changes overnight. It's about those small, consistent actions you take, day after day, that ultimately lead to those extraordinary results.
So go out there, embrace the power of ruthless consistency, and watch as you unlock your full potential.